Right, so far I've been focusing on challenges to integral that are coming either from within, that make it difficult to maintain integral, or challenges from without, from its environment, that really make it difficult to do integralism. Now I'll focus on a more constructive aspect, which is to show us where integral actually can contribute something to society in areas to society where we have, where in other words we get stuck without integral theory, and integral theory can point us interesting ways out of a difficult situation. So what I'm saying is, whatever integral means to you, I think it has something to do with what we are already doing in society. It has some kind of connection with what we've been doing here for millennia. It's not like its own worldview and its own ideology that has nothing to do with what society is doing, but it is something that solves specific problems that we are already embedded with, in society. And one of these specific challenges is the problem of orientational knowledge. Now, this concept comes from the German Romanticist tradition of thinking, and it's usually in German, this kind of knowledge, orientational knowledge, is called Bildung, which is a kind of knowledge that is very distinct from information or just knowing something. In integral language, you could basically call this kind of orientational knowledge a relationship to the world, to self, and to others. In other words, a more refined version of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Having a refined version of the good, the true, and the beautiful. This kind of knowledge is not only about the world, but it situates you in that world. It also includes a self-conception of who you are, who you want to be. In other words, it also contains value judgments of what to do, what not to do, imperatives, what to pay attention to, what not to pay attention to. It already implies hierarchies, what is more important and what is less important, and so forth. Orientational knowledge is the kind of knowledge that Humboldt wanted the humanities to be responsible for and create. It was a kind of knowledge that gives you a first hint of who you are in the world and what there is to yet discover. And I think integral theory is basically about that. Whatever other conception you have of integral theory, I think most foundationally, most basically, integral theory is about providing us with such a form of orientational knowledge. And this is what you also hear many people say very often, that what integral theory did to them was to introduce them to many different fields that they hadn't heard about. And if you think about where Wilber's path in integral theory started, is his frustration, his anger with his parents, with his teachers not having told him about mysticism. He was frustrated that he was, I don't know, in his late teens when he discovered about the spiritual traditions, and he had not really heard about them on any really useful and refined or representative, in a representative way that would have gotten his attention and that would have made him, that would have given him a basic orientation of what spirituality actually is about. All he had been given was bias and assumptions that simply had nothing to do with the actual thing. So integral theory at its core, on its most, if you want, simple, in its most simple way, is about basically providing him with such orientational knowledge that Ken wasn't given, or that Ken didn't have when he was a teenager. It is not a coincidence that he made it his life, his entire life's purpose or mission to actually dig up sources that he then could share with others and help them to get into the mindset of the sources more easily. And integral theory here solves a problem that I think, I'm not sure it solves it, but I would say it's a really good starting point for something that the humanities have not been successful in the past 50 years at all. Most people who have studied the humanities that I know don't feel like it has been providing them with orientational knowledge at all. It just doesn't really have any relevance whatsoever. And I'm talking about people who actually come from this German background, who have studied humanities at German universities that actually should be the pinnacle of this Bildung tradition, but it simply doesn't exist. Building is something that is a very, very minority endeavor, that is something that is practiced by only a very few theoreticians, and yet it's something that everybody needs. It's something that every one of us, no matter how well-oriented or not oriented at all, needs and searches for, and unless they are given this kind of orientation, people usually tend to move towards ideologies that don't really give them a big picture, but provide them with basic distinctions that help them make, divide the world into the good and the bad, and feel like they comprehend anything at all. And Integral is basically about giving you a little bit of a more refined picture of what is out there for you to discover, giving you a bit more refined picture of what science actually is, of what spirituality actually could be, of what art or what music, for example, could become for you. And this is something that I think we have to retain. This basic thrust of integral theory of being, of providing us with orientational knowledge and filling this kind of gap that we don't have institutions for, but all of us have a really pressing need for. And I don't think it's a coincidence that people who have been, like Jordan Peterson or Sam Harris, who have noticed this lack of orientational knowledge in our present-day societies, that so many people got so hooked on their kind of approach, or their big think approach, where they're providing people with a general sense of orientation that brings together science with religion, that brings together different disciplines, that brings together the ordinary life experience with the experiences of specialists observing specific objects. I don't think it's a coincidence that they have such huge followings of people that are really, really hungry for this kind of knowledge. And I think it really makes sense to systematize this, to create a space where integral theory can be really effective at communicating this kind of orientational knowledge within a community of people who are devoted to creating it and to spreading it. So put differently, it would be basically what the humanities supposedly were there for, but never really lived up to create orientational knowledge that helps people who have maybe no background at all in the various spiritual traditions or in the various knowledge traditions, to gain a first sense of what they're about, and to gain a first orientation, and to become more curious about what there is for them to discover. And orientational knowledge is the kind of knowledge that bridges both extremes of being absolutely naive and uninformed about the world, and being someone who has a somewhat refined position. When you learn refined positions, it just doesn't just work by putting you into a space and making you read something, but you also need to have the kind of orientational knowledge that gives you a sense of where to look, where to start reading, what to start practicing, and so forth. And this is usually something that is not institutionalized. This is why it doesn't really it doesn't simply work to provide people with access to education. This is not enough. It is not enough to have people access to education, but they also have to have access to orientational knowledge. And the orientational knowledge usually you get from your family, from people that you have close contact with, but it's not something that you can expect from institutionalized environments. And I have heard professors say that the most valuable aspect actually of university is this informal aspect, which really begins when the official one has ended, when people can meet, when students can meet with their professors, when they can really dig deep and when they can delve into doing philosophy, into doing inquiry and asking the questions that are really, really relevant to them. And this is something that has never been formalized, and I believe you can't formalize. But yet the need for this kind of orientational knowledge is in every one of us, and those who don't have access to it will end up, learning less and doing worse in the traditional and established conventional learning spaces. And it's not because they're too stupid, and I also doubt it's because of their genetic background, but I believe it's because they don't have available the same means and the same orientational knowledge that others have, in form of their parents, for example, or in form of competent others that they have grown up with and have been able to observe and watch while they practice their own professionalized perspective.